He let her go, and she never came back the same. The door creaked in silence. He stood there, as if the moment demanded no reaction. He simply watched her fade into the darkness, without saying a word, without trying to stop her. How could a Levite hand over his wife to death? And why was this chapter nearly erased from the Bible? What is about to be told is not just an ancient story, it is a mirror. A biblical mystery that reveals the collapse of faith when people live without direction, without a king, and without compassion. She had no name. She was simply called a concubine, as if her identity mattered less than her role. But God preserved her in the text, not for the title, but for the pain. Her silent existence exposes the spiritual cry of an entire people. In those days, Israel was a body without a soul. The tribes existed, but God's presence was ignored. The altars were forgotten. Decisions were made by instinct, not obedience, and the victims were buried in the collective silence of a numbed nation. The Levite, a man set apart to represent the presence of God, carried more uncertainty than faith. He traveled with her but no longer knew how to see her. The wound between them was invisible to the eye, yet deep enough to keep them silent the entire way. She ran away without a word. She went back to her father's house as someone seeking shelter after a storm. Perhaps out of shame, perhaps out of fear, or simply because she could no longer stand being treated as invisible by someone who claimed to love her. Now she was back, not because she wanted to be, but because he had come for her. He did not bring comfort. He brought arguments. He did not ask forgiveness. He just knocked on the door with the certainty that she was still his. It was too late to start over, but even so, they left. The sky darkened over the mountains of Ephraim. The road was dust and silence. No one spoke, because sometimes relationships do not die with shouting, but with absences that bleed on the inside. The journey was not long, but what separated them was not distance. It was the lack of truth. Israel was living one of its darkest moments. There was no king, and everyone did what seemed right in their own eyes. Faith dissolved into routine. Sin claimed the street corners, and no one seemed to notice. But this story does not begin with an army, nor with a prophet. It begins with a woman alone, a hesitant man, and a night from which no one returned whole. All of this is recorded in the book of Judges, chapter 19, the chapter many avoid, and that almost disappeared from the memory of the people. But perhaps because it looks too much like what we still live today. Today, you will enter the darkest and most neglected chapter of Scripture, a secret of the Bible that few have the courage to face, and that forces us to ask, who are we when no one else is watching? He was a Levite. He held position, authority, and respect. He carried the scrolls of the law, but did not know what to do with his own feelings. The courage he demanded from others, he could not find in himself. Faced with pain, he chose to postpone. Faced with crisis, he hid behind formalities. When he arrived at the woman's father's house, he was warmly received. The father-in-law welcomed him with celebration, wine, and plentiful conversation. Everything looked peaceful. But behind the hospitality was a noisy absence. No one spoke of her running away. No one spoke of the pain. It was easier to eat than to confront, easier to smile than to resolve. The Levite accepted it all and stayed. One day, then two, then three. Time slipped away like sand through his fingers, and he remained, like someone afraid to return to the road of truth. Like someone who preferred a comfortable couch to the responsibility of starting over with dignity. The father-in-law insisted, "Stay a little longer," and he gave in, not out of affection, but because delaying felt safer than facing what they had become. The woman, now silent, watched, perhaps with hope, perhaps with resignation. They no longer looked like the couple who once dreamed of walking together. just two survivors of a cracked relationship, trapped in polite but empty gestures. On the fifth day, something changed. He rose in haste. He would not wait for another sunset there. He said he would leave, but the father-in-law insisted again, and the Levite, weak in resolve, once more gave in to the pressure. They ate one more time, laughed one last time, and only in the afternoon did he decide to go. Too late for a safe journey. There was a spiritual clock ticking silently in that house. The time for mercy was running out, and he, distracted by comforts, did not see it. His steps were those of a righteous man, but his soul was complacent. The road ahead was already in shadow. Night was falling, and Jerusalem, then called Jebus, was just ahead. But he hesitated. "We will not enter there," he said. "It is a city of foreigners. They do not belong to our people." He chose to go further, searching for a place that seemed safer, more holy, more familiar. But the problem was never the city. It was the hour. It was the state of his soul. It was the absence of discernment, and whoever does not hear the right time does not recognize the right place. That day, a Levite, bearer of the truth, failed to see the sign from heaven. He rejected Jebus for appearing worldly. He chose Gibeah because it seemed right. But there is no wisdom where there is only appearance, and there is no protection where God's presence is absent. This story needs to be heard by more people, so leave your like. And if you believe that silencing truth is also injustice, join us. Subscribe to the channel and share this truth before it is forgotten again. On that road of choices and delays, it was not only the woman who was at risk, it was the very covenant between faith and conscience. When leaders fall silent, when husbands withdraw, when Levites postpone, heaven closes, not with thunder, but with silence. The sun was gone. The shadow spread over the road. And he, who had everything to protect, surrendered his home to the mercy of the night. He arrived with the sky already stained red. Gibeah seemed safe at first glance. Solid houses, narrow streets, fields surrounding it. But there was something wrong in the air, a silence that did not come from peace, but from absence. The Levite and his woman stayed in the square. They waited. No one offered shelter. No door opened. Time passed. Children returned home. Women shut their windows. Men walked by with dry eyes. An entire city pretending not to see. And when a city gets used to ignoring the vulnerable, it is no longer a home. It is a reflection of judgment. The Levite fell silent. The woman looked at him, but he avoided her gaze. In his hands, he held the truth of the scrolls, but not the courage of a husband. It was already night when an old man appeared, returning from the field. He was surprised to see anyone in the square at that hour. "Where are you going?" he asked. The Levite told him of his journey, from Ephraim to Bethlehem. The old man fell silent, and then, almost whispering, he said, "Come with me. This square is not safe at night." Gibeah was part of Israel. It was not foreign land. It belonged to the tribe of Benjamin, and yet not a single brother opened his door. It was an elder, a man who should have been resting, who did what the others did not dare. In silence, the biblical mystery of that night began to unfold, not with thunder, but with omissions. As the old man prepared the shelter, the Levite observed the modest home, a simple roof, dry bread, straw for the animals. Yet there was more dignity there than in the entire city, and even so, something inside him remained unmoved. The same paralysis that had made him leave too late, the same silence that kept growing. Outside, footsteps began to echo, voices gathered. Men, many, surrounded the door. They knocked, they shouted. They did not want money. They did not want food. They wanted the Levite. The perversion was no longer a secret. It was a collective roar. The city had forgotten the presence of God, and now it demanded bodies to satisfy its darkness. The old man stood up and went to the door. His voice trembling, he pleaded, "Do not commit this wickedness. He is in my house. Do what you want with me, or with my daughter, but leave him in peace." A phrase that should have been courage turned into desperation. A gesture meant to protect revealed just how corrupt everything had become. And then, faced with the horror, the Levite said nothing. He did not stand between her and the men. He did not shout. He did not run. He simply listened. The same silence that allowed her to be forgotten at home now condemned her before the city. Was there enough strength to drive the attackers away? Perhaps, but there was no spiritual courage. Was there enough knowledge of the Torah to recognize evil? Yes, but there was no fear of God. Gibeah, the city of the chosen people, was now the shadow of Sodom. And in that house, where there was still bread and hospitality, the light began to fade. The pounding on the door grew louder, the sound of wood giving way, and inside, no one had a voice left. The Levite turned his eyes away. The old man trembled, and she began to realize there was no one left standing between her and the abyss. The city that seemed welcoming was the tomb of compassion. Gibeah did not just forget God. Gibeah forgot humanity. She had no choice, no voice, no name. When the door opened, the world waiting for her was not made of ground, but of darkness. A rotten silence covered the streets of Gibeah. No neighbor opened a window. No mother rose to stop it. No priest interceded. The entire city seemed to sleep, except for those waiting for her on the sidewalk. The hands that pushed her out were familiar. Hands that had once held hers, that had promised care, that had sworn some kind of covenant even if broken. But now, the covenant was with fear, with cowardice, with self-preservation, and she was thrown to the wolves, without a shield, without a voice. In the darkness, the sounds came first. Stifled laughter, footsteps, doors closing, their breathing weighed in the air. Hers could barely be heard. No plea left her lips, because she knew no one would listen. It was as if God had withdrawn from that city. As if every street was sealed against compassion. She was taken from house to house, from corner to corner. What they did to her does not need to be described, because the pain screams even in silence. The horror of the night was long, and those who took part were many. None of them saw a human being. None of them feared heaven, and the heavens seemed not to answer. The stars only witnessed. The stones on the ground said nothing. It was as if the book of Judges, chapter 19, had been written in her blood and in the silence of everyone else. The Bible recorded it, but the story was almost forgotten, because remembering what happened is unbearable even today. When dawn began to break, her feet touched the road back, but her strength no longer accompanied her. No help came. No hand reached out. No lamp was lit. She crawled, one step, then another. Each movement hurt more than the last. And even so she continued, toward the door from which she had left. She reached the threshold, that small strip of wood where feet are wiped before entering. There she fell, hand outstretched, her face without color, her body without voice. But her posture said everything. She did not want to barge in, nor ask for help. She only wanted to be seen, to be heard, to be remembered. But no one opened. The Bible says she died there, alone, silent, close to the ground. And that scene is an open wound in the history of faith, because it was not a pagan people who killed her. It was the people of the covenant. It was Israel. It was the city that should have known justice and knew only terror. This woman did not die only from assault. She died from omission, from abandonment, from being treated as a thing, disposable, replaceable, invisible. And the most frightening part is that no one cried out for her. No priest raised a lament. No Levite wrote a song. Only a body lying at the door. That is why this chapter was almost erased, because it exposes the deepest spiritual sorrow in the Bible, that of a people who no longer feel shame, who no longer hear God, who no longer defend the vulnerable, who no longer fear their own evil. And she remains without a name, not because God forgot her, but because perhaps her name is our own, our generation, our omission, our silence. The threshold is still there, where pain leaned and no one answered. And the question echoes, how many doors remain closed while injustice pounds on them with force? The sun had already risen when he opened the door, and there she was, lying there, silent, with her hand still touching the threshold. The Levite did not scream, he did not weep, he did not throw himself to the ground. He only said, "Get up, let's go." But she did not answer, and in that moment, for the first time in the entire narrative, the Levite found himself alone, truly alone. The woman he did not protect could no longer hear him. We do not know if he knelt, if he touched her with tenderness, if he whispered any apology. The Bible only shows the next movement. He placed her on the donkey as someone carrying a burden, but also as someone bearing a pain too great for words. The road back looked the same, but something had changed. There was no more hesitation. There was urgency. When he reached home, something inside him broke. It was not a cry, nor a prayer. It was a decision, brutal, unthinkable, inconceivable. He took a knife and he cut her body into 12 parts, 12, like the number of the tribes of Israel, as if to say, "This death is not mine alone, it belongs to all of you." Each piece was placed in a sack, and each sack sent to a tribe, without ceremony, without explanation, only with a letter. The letter did not ask for forgiveness, nor justice. It simply said, "Look at what has happened in Israel. Something never seen since we came out of Egypt." It was like a shock, like a cry no one expected to hear. Those parts reached the leaders, the elders, the princes, and no one knew what to do. Some wept, others tore their robes, but everyone understood. It was no longer possible to pretend nothing had happened. This woman, this torn body, was now the image of a wounded nation. A story that, if told only as personal tragedy, might have been buried with her. But by being cut, it multiplied in pain, in awareness, in accusation. Judges chapter 19 stops being a forgotten story. It becomes a mirror. And here the narrative bows before a difficult revelation. When injustice is not heard, it transforms into something even more cruel. It spreads, it bleeds through the hands of those who pretended not to see. The Levite who did not protect, now denounces. But his act is not just a plea for justice, it is also an exposure. Because by cutting the body, he reveals not only what they did to her, but what everyone allowed to happen. This is one of the most disturbing secrets in the Bible, one that many avoid reading, that is rarely preached, because it does not bring immediate comfort, because it forces us to face how much we resemble those who stayed silent. And if today this story still moves you, perhaps it is because it has not ended. Perhaps because even now there are pains being packaged and sent to the conscience of a generation that needs to wake up. They did not know what to do, but they knew they could not pretend anymore. The 12 pieces of the body had reached the farthest corners of Israel, with silence screaming louder than any speech. For the first time in generations, the tribes united. From Beersheba to Dan, everyone rose. It was as if the entire nation had awakened from a spiritual coma. And now the question was, what to do with the tribe of Benjamin? 7 times they tried to negotiate. 7. The elders of Israel sent messengers to Benjamin demanding only one thing: hand over the men of Belial who committed such an abomination. But the answer was another wound. Benjamin closed ranks, defended its own, refused justice, and that sealed the fate of thousands. Israel prepared for war. But before that, they wept. They went up to Bethel. They fasted. They asked God, who should go first? The answer came, Judah will go. Confident they marched and lost. 22,000 men fell on the first day, and on the second, another 18,000. They sought justice and received death. On the third day, something changed. They returned to the sanctuary, they shed tears, they offered sacrifices, they cried out, not for revenge, but for guidance. And this time God said, Go, I will deliver them into your hands." It was the beginning of victory and of tragedy. Benjamin was cornered, Israel's swords advanced with fury, and when the last blow was struck, only 600 men remained, hiding among the rocks of Rimmon. Everything they had was lost. Families, homes, cities. Israel had won, but looking around, they saw only ruins. This is the biblical mystery that few dare to explain. How did a story of rape become a holy war? How did the silence of one city lead to the fall of an entire tribe? Why does justice, when delayed, cost so much blood? Judges chapter 20 is not just a continuation. It is a mirror of what happens when people rise too late. When outrage comes, but only after destruction. The people sought God, but only after the shock, only after the pain, and that made them fragile before the first defeat. But there is something even deeper here. Benjamin did not fall only because of the sinners within it, but because it chose to protect them. When a community covers for wrongdoing, the wrongdoing becomes the spirit of the city, and God, who is just, allows the consequences to teach what the heart refused to hear. The war that began with rape ended with silence, but an even deeper silence. Now, it was not just one nameless woman, it was an entire tribe without hope. And as the swords were sheathed, the leaders asked themselves, "What will we do now with the survivors?" Because the people who cried out for justice now did not know how to handle grace. 600 men, hiding among the rocks, the last of an entire tribe, and not a single woman beside them. Israel had defeated them, but now did not know what to do with its own victory. The oath was clear. None of us will give our daughters as wives to the Benjamites. It was justice, creating a new abyss. So they began to look for a solution, not among the living, but among the vulnerable. The tribes searched for a city that had not joined the war and found Jabesh Gilead, and as punishment, they killed all the men, women, and children of that city, except the virgins, 400. They were taken without choice, offered as a solution. But there were still 200 missing, and that was when Israel did the unthinkable. They suggested that Benjamin abduct women. Yes. During a religious festival, the survivors of Benjamin hid among the vineyards, waiting. When the young women of Shiloh came out to dance, they would run and seize them. That was the new agreement, the new settlement. And so it happened. 200 women were taken, not for love, but for necessity, for survival, by a silent agreement among men who had already killed too many and now needed to pretend there was a solution. The book of Judges ends this way, without glory, without restoration, only with one sentence. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what seemed right in their own eyes. This is the kind of theological interpretation few want to make, because it exposes what we prefer to hide, that collective sin always demands payment from the most vulnerable, that the silence of the strong always falls on the shoulders of the invisible. If this story has shaken your faith, if you believe truths like this can no longer be silenced, then join us. Leave your like, share this story with those who need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. Because when pain is forgotten, it repeats. In the comments, tell us, what hurt you more, the silence of men or the abandonment of God? May the Lord bless you, keep you, and give you courage never to remain silent in the face of injustice.